Laws. The struggle is really born in the heart and mind of the community, where it really counts. Good evening, everyone. I welcome you all to the event celebrating Pride Month organized by Gavel Makers. My name is Divya Mishra, and today I would like to take this opportunity to introduce the organizers of this event, Gavel Makers. Gavel Makers is an initiative started by three law students who will provide you a place where law education is made interesting. Gavel Makers aims to build a strong and an active community of law students who don't hesitate in speaking up their mind. We believe that every layman should be aware of the law of their land, and we shall also promote legal education. Now, I would like to introduce the speakers for the event. Our first speaker is Ms. Anjali Gopalan. She is the founder and executive director of the NAS Foundation Trust. She was born in Chennai, Tamil Nadu. She studied in both India and US. On returning to India in the early 90s, she was frustrated at the lack of government response and even civil society response to the burgeoning HIV epidemic. Her response was to begin NAS India and to focus on communities stigmatized by societies. As a strong advocate for the sexual health and rights of the LGBT community, Ms. Anjali spearheaded the 8-year legal battle against Section 377 of the Indian Penal Code. In 2001, her organization filed a PIL to decriminalize homosexuality and put an end to the archaic law under which individuals were harassed and discriminated against based on their sexual orientation. The Delhi High Court ruled in favor of NAS Foundation in 2009 and declared Section 377 an infringement on individual rights. This groundbreaking ruling was a great leap towards an accepting and discrimination free society. Since founding NAS India, Ms. Anjali has spoken in numerous international venues about the importance of advancing research to aid HIV prevention and providing quality care to those living with the HIV infection. Today, Ms. Anjali to push the boundaries in the field of HIV/AIDS and help NAS persist with the important work. Now, I would like to introduce our second speaker, Ms. Kritika Balu. Kritika Balu is a lawyer and researcher based in Bangalore who works on a wide range of human rights issues. She has represented various marginalized and oppressed groups in courts, including Rohingya refugees, persons with disabilities, acid attack survivors, and transgender persons. She is a vocal activist for the LGBTQIA plus community, and as a bisexual person herself, she has spoken out vocally against bi erasure as a common phenomenon faced by the bi community. Ms. Kritika has worked with the Solidarity Foundation, an organization in Bangalore, on developing a policy brief for the recognition of intersex persons in India. Now, I would like to introduce our third speaker, Ms. Dr. Inderpreet Kaur. She is an assistant professor at K.R. Mangalam University. Since 2010, she took lectures of graduates and LLM students and taught various subjects of law and on laws relating to vulnerable groups, etc. She was also a part of firm and attended matters with regard to arbitration, settlement, and negotiation on behalf of the company and client. She has assisted during the court proceedings at District Court and State Consumer Redressal Commission. I welcome all the speakers wholeheartedly and thank you so much for blessing us with your benevolent presence. Now, I would like to hand over the stage to Anjali ma'am and request her to kindly share a few words of wisdom.
Oh, I don't know about the wisdom bit, but yeah, hi everyone, and thank you for hosting this. And Galaxy has taken a stand on making this happen. And I also want to say hi to my fellow panelists. I'm really looking forward to listening from them. Um, I it's interesting when I was working was with the MSM community, men having sex with men community. I realized that many men were married to women, and therefore this whole notion of just working with men made no sense, because if you're married to women, the impact on the lives of women and children is tremendous. So when we're looking at HIV prevention, we had to look at it in a larger framework. So when we first started working with the community, one thing became very clear, that many men wanted to be married to women. There were no role models. I still remember, and it still happens to this day, young men, and this has always broken my heart, asking me, is there any medicine that can make me feel different, that can stop me from feeling this way? Yeah. Or the fact that, oh, is it possible to spend the rest of your life with another man? And then what happens to the reasons why we usually say we get married, which is, how will the family name continue? Who will look after me in my old age? Who will look after my parents in their old age? Because there were no, at that time, I'm talking about the mid 90s, there were no role models. There were no spaces. People, even the language was not there to express what you felt. So for us, it became very critical that we start looking. I felt it was very important to start building community, because I believe if you don't have a sense of community, if you don't, if you don't look at how you're going to live the life that you want to live, or that you can't even visualize that, this wouldn't happen without community building. And of course, the whole HIV prevention bit, which was so important for us. So when we initially, it was interesting. We started by going out there, giving out condoms, talking to people about HIV. And I got a lot of flack, by the way, from the community, especially older people who would say, oh, what does she know? She's come from the West. She wants us to stop having sex. This disease that she's talking about only exists in the West. It has nothing to do with us. Don't listen to her, kind of thing, right? But we persist, because usually like a dog with a bone, I attach myself to something. And as we started working, one of the things we realized was the constant harassment by the police. Of course, we have one of the most corrupt, and you as young lawyers will have to deal with this, one of the most corrupt police forces in the world. So it was such a problem with the cops all the time. For example, our outreach workers go out in parks and in outside toilets and like that, and talk about HIV prevention. They would have them in the time, and I would have to seven आप लोग negotiating with police station, and we definitely some amount of the acting. But I think what also happened was, as I started getting increasingly involved in counseling, and especially counseling of family, a lot of men, sexuality doesn't matter in our culture. Parents would bring in men.
Ma'am, the stage is yours. You may enlighten us. Thank you so much.
I don't know if enlightenment is really on the agenda, but can I present?
Yes, ma'am, sure.
Am I audible clearly?
Yes, ma'am, you are audible.
So I wanted to talk about something a little more specific. Is my presentation visible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So I wanted to talk about, rather than the LGBTQIA plus community as a whole, I wanted to talk about, sorry?
Ma'am, please continue. It's from Anjali ma'am's side. We are muting her.
Sure.
Then who will come? We will unmute her.
Sure. So this presentation will take about 20 to 25 minutes. I suggest that you all put down your questions in writing and we can discuss them at the end. So I wanted to talk about something a little more specific, being the recognition and rights of the intersex community specifically. So when we look at human rights of LGBTQIA persons, there has been a lot of discussion, as Anjali ma'am commenced on, regarding the basically the right to love and the right to undergo a private life in the way that you want to without discrimination. However, I want to take it one step back with the intersex community and talk about the right to recognition itself as an intersex person or as an intersex person who has a self-assigned gender. So before I get ahead of myself, I want to talk about who intersex persons are and what intersex is about. So on the left side of the screen, you may see the common symbol for intersex. So intersex persons are those who are born with sex characteristics that do not fit the typical traditional notions of male or female bodies. So intersex itself is used to describe a range of bodily variations. So for some people, intersex traits are visible at birth. For some persons, the traits are not visible or apparent until puberty. And even for others, variations take place at the genetic level. So those may not even manifest physically at all. So across the world, there are estimates that as much as 1.7% of our population is born with intersex traits. But again, many individuals are unknowingly intersex, and our understanding of intersex itself is so incomplete and flawed that this estimate also may be incorrect. So basically, when we talk about intersex and the inclusion of intersex in the LGBTQIA+ acronym, intersex actually relates to biological sex characteristics which are different from gender identity or sexual orientation of persons. So for instance, intersex persons may identify as male, they may identify as female, they may identify as outside of the same, and their sexual orientation will not be constrained or will not be defined by their intersex status. They can be of any sexual orientation. So just a brief about intersex movements across the world. So we'll get to India in a moment, but I just wanted to briefly talk about intersex persons' voices over the years. So this is a picture from the 3rd International Intersex Forum that took place in December 2013 in Malta. So far from being in the shadows, intersex movements internationally have been responsible for not only uniting but also visibilizing intersex identities and rights. So intersex persons, like transgender persons, have fought in societies all around the world for acceptance as well as recognition. However, the distinction is that even though transgender rights campaigns have actually gained momentum in recent years, intersex issues still remain misunderstood, even within queer communities. So in the 3rd International Intersex Forum that took place in November and December 2013, 34 activists representing 30 intersex organizations from different continents across the world met in Malta, and they came up with a public statement known as the Malta Declaration. So it's very important to see the beginning of the Malta Declaration itself. So in its preamble, the Malta Declaration affirms that intersex people are real, that they exist in all regions and all countries around the world. The preamble further states that intersex persons must be supported to be the drivers of social, political, as well as legal changes that concern them, meaning that this community has specific concerns that require reflection in movements, policies, laws across the world. So further to this, the Malta Declaration itself put a list of 17 demands that aimed to end discrimination against intersex persons and to ensure basic human rights of bodily integrity, physical autonomy, and self-determination of intersex persons. So the forum also called upon different sets of stakeholders from across the world, including human rights organizations, governments, media agencies, funders, to support and to contribute in the movement at different scales. So, however, to understand more of what the demands of these intersex activists were based on, we have to look at the basic issues faced by the intersex community. So I want you to take a look at this image, and I want you to take a look at what is written under the image as well. So when we look at the concerns of intersex persons, there are certain unique concerns that are slightly different from the concerns of other communities whose movements that we are aware of. So one such immediate concern that is experienced at birth for a lot of intersex children is protection from intersex genital mutilation. So basically, on the birth of a child or at infancy, when intersex variations of children become apparent, there is often a decision, and this is all across the world, there's often a decision to subject these intersex children to life-altering surgeries. And these decisions are usually taken by the parents or by the doctors of infants. So the primary intention behind such surgeries is sex normalization. That is, to make intersex children conform to the gender binary by surgically altering their genitalia. So I'm really oversimplifying this. There are a lot of different procedures that are undertaken. Often there are multiple procedures that are undertaken to normalize intersex children's genitalia to make them fit within the binary of male-female. And IGM, intersex genital mutilation, has no health benefits whatsoever. They are not life-saving procedures at all. In fact, they are extremely risky. They can have immense pain. They can cause things like permanent nerve damage, scarring, and often infections that may lead to persistent health issues and death. As I mentioned earlier, these procedures sometimes require multiple operations, increasing the risk of side effects, suffering, and they're highly invasive in nature. Intersex persons without these surgeries lead completely healthy lives. However, the fact that this still goes on just shows how married we are as a society to the idea of the sex binary and the idea of how genitals should look as normal males or normal females. Any variation is looked upon with disgust and revulsion and lack of understanding. So the international community, as I mentioned earlier, has recognized the gravity of human rights violations against intersex persons through intersex genital mutilation. And numerous countries have actually enacted laws that recognize intersex persons and which give them specific rights which are geared towards their unique concerns. So now this ties into the second issue. So the first issue is basically protection from intersex genital mutilation. The second issue that intersex people face in most countries is that most countries' laws require registration of the sex of a child at birth. The need for recognition of a child's sex puts significant pressure on the child's parents to register the sex of the child as male or female, again contributing to the incidence of intersex genital mutilation across the world. So now that I've given you a basic overview of two of the concerns, I'm not going to presume to say that these are the primary concerns or the majority of concerns, but just two unique concerns faced by this community. I want to talk about our understanding of intersex in India itself. So as you may know, intersex in India is still not really widely recognized. It's neither recognized socially nor is it recognized legally. Even though intersex people do not necessarily fall into the male-female sex binary, nor are they necessarily transgender, there is no concept of recording a birth of a child as intersex in India. Further, our population census also doesn't account for intersex individuals, which means that in our country, we have absolutely no idea what the actual population of intersex persons who identify as intersex actually is. So The first notable judicial mention of the term intersex was in Nalsa versus Union of India in terms of jurisprudence. And I'm sure all of you would have studied this in university. So this is a landmark judgment of the Supreme Court where they looked at, amongst others, the historical background of transgender persons in India. So the court stated that there is a wide range of transgender related identities and cultures and experience as well. And they mentioned some of these experiences. Even though in Nalsa, the court had an expansive, progressive, and very inclusive definition of knowledge and definition of different gender identities, there was absolutely no separate discussion nor deliberation around the intersex identity. There was no widespread biological understanding of intersex, nor any legal recognition of intersex as a separate sex or gender identity within the Nalsa judgment. The only mention of intersex that was made was linked to the term eunuch, which is an extremely colonial derogatory term. After this, unlike many parts of the world, as we know in India, as of now, there is no unified large-scale intersex movement. And intersex now is included within the transgender umbrella, even in law. And now it is seen that, and now we can relate this back to how intersex persons and activists have actually lent their efforts to furthering transgender movements in the country. So this is the reason that I have put all these other judgments here. So various judgments of the Madras High Court as well as the Rajasthan High Court look at transgender rights and recognition in employment opportunities and talk about individual benefits of giving employment to trans persons as individual benefits of giving employment to trans persons as well as community representation. So thanks to cases that were initiated by intersex persons, all of these mentioned here, both the Madras High Court and Rajasthan High Court have recognized that firstly, compelling a person to undergo a medical examination for gender determination is a violation of fundamental rights under Article 21 of the Constitution of India. And it has also condemned laws that recognize only male and female sexes, and they have upheld the right of people to self-identify their gender. So it is clear that legal interventions in all of these cases that have been initiated by trans persons have positively impacted the transgender movement in India. However, in spite of this important role that intersex persons have played, the lack of an organized intersex movement in the country has resulted in intersex persons having to make their voices heard through the trans movement. So that's why there is a need to separately recognize intersex persons, the intersex community legally, and to ensure that their voices are not completely subsumed within the trans movement. So I want to draw your attention to one case that I've highlighted at the bottom of the slide here, which is Arun Kumar and another versus the Inspector General of Registration and others. I'm sure you all would have read about this last year. So this marks a big change or a big step in intersex rights and recognition. So in this case, last year, the Madurai bench of the Madras High Court delivered a landmark judgment saying that, so firstly, this judgment was to uphold the validity of a marriage between a man and a trans woman, utilizing principles that were elucidated in NALSA as well as other international conventions. So in a precedent-setting judgment, the court not only upheld the validity of this marriage, but also addressed intersex genital mutilation of intersex children because the petitioner was born an intersex child. So the court pointed out very importantly that in the case of intersex genital mutilation, consent of a parent cannot be considered as consent of the child, and again reiterated the point that nobody shall be forced to undergo medical procedures as a requirement for legal recognition of their gender identity. So the court made an additional observation that parents must actually be encouraged to feel that the birth of an intersex child is not a matter of embarrassment or shame, and left it to the Tamil Nadu government to launch awareness programs in this regard. So actually, after this judgment in mid-August, the Tamil Nadu government complied with the High Court order and it banned sex reassignment surgeries or intersex genital mutilation on infants as well as children. So the state government, in actually passing this order, quoted the World Health Organization, which in a report had stated that sex normalizing procedures are firstly medically unnecessary and secondly they are irreversible with lifelong consequences for the physical and mental health of intersex persons to whom, who are subjected to these procedures. So this is a big step in India, as Tamil Nadu is the first state to actually ban intersex genital mutilation surgeries and to formally recognize unique medical experiences of intersex persons. So I'm almost coming to the end of my short presentation here. So if you look at this flag, this goes a little beyond the usual rainbow flag that we're used to seeing in the context of Pride. So this is a much more inclusive Pride Progress flag that also does encompass intersex identities, demarcated by the yellow flag with the purple circle in between. So relating all the experiences of intersex persons back to the overall human rights of LGBTQIA+ persons requires a number of paradigm shifts on our part. So firstly, we need to understand that whether we talk about gender or sex, both exist in a spectrum. The queer community does not only consist of LGBT, but includes other sexes, other gender minorities as well, including but not limited to intersex persons. So any discussion on the human rights of LGBTQIA persons is meaningless if we do not have an inclusive and an evolving understanding about who these people actually are. So secondly, after we recognize that these communities are both spectral and diverse, it is very important to understand that both the general and specific issues faced by them and the ways that lack of understanding and societal discrimination manifest in their everyday lives. So talking about the genital mutilation of intersex infants is one such issue. Where we look at one issue that is so inhumane that it should have received much more Indian attention, but the fact that there's no unified intersex movement and no amplification of intersex voices has resulted in such violations of human rights being largely swept under the rug up till last year. So this then brings us to our next point. Even if there are no larger social movements for a particular group, for instance, here intersex persons, it is important for us to listen to and amplify community voices. Let's take the Malta Declaration, for example. The demands from intersex persons from across the world who came together included things like prohibitions on mutilating practices, prohibitions on selective abortion of intersex fetuses, infanticide and killing of intersex people. There were also more positive demands made by these activists, saying that we need to ensure that sex and gender classifications can be changed easily in official documentation, spaces that are safe and supportive, and not only safe and supportive, but celebratory of such identities need to be built. And in the legal and policy field, there needs to be active international effort to build intersex anti-discrimination legislation. So the point that I am ultimately coming to is that as lawyers, as law students who care about people, who want to improve situations around us, we need to ensure that at every point when we talk about the human rights of LGBTQIA+ communities, we do not want to speak for these communities in terms of what we think their human rights should be. The best and the most effective roles that we can take up are those of allies and supporters who can use our education, use our privilege, and use our understanding to not only educate ourselves on spectrums of identities, but also to amplify community voices that bring about awareness about unique violations of human rights. When we talk about LGBTQIA plus persons realizing their human rights, we need to understand that we need to play a supportive role in that regard and not act as substitutes for their voices. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Kritika ma'am. That was really an interesting session. We learned a lot from you.
If I know that I went quite fast so as to not exceed time, but if there are any questions, just please note them down and we'll discuss them later. Back
Okay,
to you,
ma'am.
Anjali ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. Anjali ma'am, you are on mute. Could you just unmute, please?
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
The reason I kind of stepped out, and I think that's where I lost the connection, I didn't realize, because I'm sitting in the animal shelter and these animals are screaming their lungs out. Okay. So, yeah, I'm just going to continue from where I left off. Basically saying that at that point when we, even though there was so much of police harassment and things like that, we really had not thought of going, of taking any concrete step. And as we continued with our work, one of the things that happened, which really shook us to our core, is that when one of the families had brought in their sons, post-counseling, where the parents were told the boy did not want to get married, he was a gay boy, they went away, and like all parents, they forbade the young man to ever meet me again because they wanted me to basically tell him to stop being gay. And when I didn't do that, the parents stopped their sons from coming to meet me again. But in this case, a month later, this guy came in looking really shaken up. So I said, "Kya hua?" So he said, they had taken him to one of the major hospitals in Delhi, major hospitals. And he had been given shock therapy for conversion in a big hospital in Delhi. So that's when the next day itself, I went to the Human Rights Commission, who told us that they would not accept our complaint because it was a criminal activity, according to our laws. So I was shocked, and I said, "But you're the National Human Rights Commission." They said, "Sorry, we can't do anything." So that's when we were very lucky that we met up with the Lawyers Collective, who also were getting very frustrated with this law. And we decided to challenge this law. But let me tell you, we actually went at it not from the rights angle. Because if you recall at that time, I'm talking about the late 1990s, there were hardly any groups. And when I did speak to Ashok from Humsafar, he said, "Look, we'll support you. You can stick your neck out right now. We can't. The environment is so negative." So at that point, we went at it we wanted a foot through the door. So we went at it from the HIV angle, from the health angle. And of course, initially, we got thrown out of the High Court. We went to the Supreme Court, who referred us back to the High Court. And then finally in 2009, we got a very good judgment reading Section 377 down, because that's what we'd asked for. Because like most of our laws, which are archaic and beyond belief sometimes, we did not have a law which specifically looked at protection of children against sexual abuse. And 377 was used for that. Just close this door. Just 1 second. Quickly, Mark. Just close the door. Maybe it'll be less noisy. Yeah. So, there was Section 377 was used to prosecute for child sexual abuse. So we asked for a reading down of the law to exclude consenting adults of the same sex from the purview of this law. And that's exactly what the courts gave us. And then for a few years, everyone was really excited at that time. And if you remember, many people came out, and environment was a very positive one. And then the impossible happened. Hindu, Muslim, Christian groups, we did the impossible, got together and basically said it was against their cultures and their values. And the Supreme Court bought into that. And then forever we sat around with nothing happening. And then finally, thank God, we had people who were gay who actually went to the courts and said, look, we are not some minuscule minority, which is what the court said they were. We exist, and here we are, and we really want you to listen to our arguments. And thank God the Supreme Court did, and then finally Section 377 was read down. But interestingly, all that's happened is that homosexuality has been decriminalized. The community still doesn't have the rights that every other citizen in this country has. You know, basic rights that you don't even think of as rights, like the right to marry, the right to adopt, the right to inherit, all of those issues are still issues for the community. So the one good thing that happened with decriminalizing is that at least we as a culture, all of us, could no longer say that, look, this is a Western phenomenon, it's not Indian, it doesn't exist in India. We couldn't sweep it under the carpet anymore. So that's one big thing that's happened. But the fight for rights is now still, it's barely started. And there are many of us who are looking at it from different angles. For example, I personally, I'm not a great advocate for, I support it, don't get me wrong, but for rights like the right to marriage, because I think that's where the most pushback is going to happen. Whereas and in this country, we don't have an anti-discriminatory law. So if we had an overarching anti-discriminatory cover, which covered everybody, whether it is couples who are from different communities and castes getting married, or gay couples, or trans couples, intersex people, whoever, everyone would then be protected in some way. This is just my thinking, and I'm still having these discussions with many lawyers and people from the community. So have things changed? Yes, I think there's a huge change in the last 25 years from when I started my work and today. At least we're talking about these issues. I know that I'm doing a lot of sessions on diversity and inclusion with the corporate world, for example. There's a lot of work with the police that is happening. So I think lots of changes have happened. The transgender judgment, for one, the NALSA judgment also created a different platform. Unfortunately, they also were very clear. They said, look, this is only meant for trans people. And then we had a lot of trans people come to us and say, look, there is no space in this judgment for those of us who are trans. It seems that it's only the kinder community which seems to be benefiting from this. This is what some trans people are saying. So the thing is, how do we make these laws gender neutral? How do we make them inclusive? These are issues that we still have to look at. Are we dealing with very basic issues? Yes. For example, conversion therapy is still happening. In Delhi, I can tell you that there are doctors who openly advertise it, and right now we're with the Medical Association fighting for three of these doctors to lose their license because they were advertising it openly, that they can make gay people straight. So these kind of issues continue to dog us, and I think the battle for rights is going to be a very contentious one. But it's something that all of us need to really put our weight behind. As young lawyers, you'll need to start looking at what can be done and really reaching out to the community. But a lot of this happens, for example, if you really want to reach out to the community and do something for the community, is the first thing we have to do is work with the fears that we have. Because one of the things I know, for example, one is lack of knowledge, right? Many of us, for example, don't know enough about the intersex community. And we're really lucky that we've had some really progressive judgments from the Madras High Court, for one, on the intersex issue. So I think this battle is going to be a very difficult one. There is going to be a lot of pushback now. And we cannot sit back on and feel really good that, okay, it's been decriminalized and it's great. Please understand, decriminalizing does not mean rights have been given to the community. And the community still faces a lot of issues. For example, if you look at the trans community, recently, if you remember, I think it was either in Kochi, I think Kochi, or Bangalore, I can't remember where, 8 transgender people were given jobs in the metro. And they had to leave for 2 reasons. One is they could not find housing close to their job. And secondly, they had a hard time by people who were traveling on the metro. They were given a very hard time. So unless we work on changing attitudes and really understanding how do we even start dealing with the kind of exclusion that people from the community face, it's going to be a very difficult time ahead of us. Though, is it all gloom and doom? Of course not. Things have changed. Things have improved. We see a lot more families, for example, accepting gay children. So some amount of change is beginning to happen. But when I look at issues of the community, I feel that we are at that stage. We are at a stage of takeoff, and really we should make the most of it, because there is no other way out. We cannot live in a democracy or think that we are living in a democracy where we are excluding people from accessing their rights, or believing that just by decriminalizing we have done a great job. Please, we haven't done anyone a favor. What has to happen is something, this rights is the right of a person to get all the rights that everyone in this country has. So this is something that all of us have to constantly keep on the front burner, that we cannot let up on this at all. Yeah. So I'm going to stop there. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Anjali ma'am, for sharing the real life scenarios. It's some things which you spoke really put questions in my mind also, that is this the world in which we are living? Because some things which you spoke were really unreasonable. You can't do this. And people like medical practitioners who have the responsibility on their shoulder to save the people, they are the ones who are advertising such things. So thank you so much, ma'am, for enlightening us. Now I request Inderpreet ma'am. Ma'am, please take the floor. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Just a second.
Sure, ma'am.
A very good evening to everyone. It was very nice listening to Anjali ma'am and Kritika ma'am. And as you all are working there, so you are having a better experience what I have, because I am into teaching and I just go through the laws and I just study the laws and the case laws. That's it. But as you all are working there, so you have a better experience than me. But still, I want to share my opinion also on this. So first of all, the important thing is, what is a peer group, queer group? Sorry, I'm so nervous also. What is the queer group? So queer is an umbrella term for sexual and gender minorities who are not heterosexual or are not cisgender. So originally the strange or the peculiar queer which came to be used against those with same-sex desires or relationships in the 19th century. And this is not at all a new concept which came into existence. We have been witnessing this since the time of Ramayana and Mahabharata also. So it was already there in the society, and for which they have been fighting for their rights. So now, who all are covered under the LGBTQIAP? So they all are lesbians, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, asexual, and pansexual people who are fighting for their rights, and the organizations who like NAS foundations and all the NGOs who are giving their involvement and trying to protect their rights. They are fighting for them. And there are some of the findings which have been shown that in the whole population, 2% of the Indian population identify as other than male and female, and these includes the transgender, non-binary, non-conforming, gender fluid, and others. And they regard, in regards to this, the sexual orientation, the report also shows that there are 3% of the Indian population identity as homosexuals, and some of the they also identify as bisexuals and pansexual and asexual. So totally 17% identity are covered under the heterosexuals. Now moving ahead to the next, that what is there that makes them uncomfortable, or what they have to face in the society is the violence and the inequality, and sometimes the torture, and even the execution, because of their nature, because of the love whom they do, or how they look, or who they are, the people who are belonging to such communities. And the sexual orientation and the gender identity are also one of the integral aspects of themselves, and they should never lead to discriminate, they should not be discriminated or abused. And the Human Rights Watch, which is an international NGO, they have been working on the rights of the lesbians, gays, bisexual, and transgenders peoples rights. Now coming to this, so when we talk about the society, there are people, well-known people, who have declared themselves as belonging to such communities, such as Harish Iyer. He is the first openly gay person to become a politician. Then Vikram Seth is there, who is the best known for his novel A Suitable Boy, and he was a son of a chief justice of a high court in India, and he has studied in one of the best schools in the country before going for the higher studies, and his parents accepted that yes, when he has revealed such kind of fact to their parents. Then Gauri Sawant, then Manvendra Singh Gohil, Sonal Gyani, they are some of the people who have disclosed their identities in the society. So further moving to the crimes which are related to such people, which they have been facing in the society, are some of the abuses which are based on the sexual orientation and the gender identity worldwide, right? Then the torture which they have been facing, then arrest under unjust laws, unequal treatment in the society, then medical abuses, discrimination in health and jobs and housing, domestic violence. Why domestic violence? Because when they reveal this fact that we belong to such community, the parents itself, it is very difficult for the parents itself to accept this fact that yes, our child is saying that I belong to such community, because of fear or shame or whatever may be the reason. The domestic violence is also being faced by such people. Then abuses against the children in the schools, in the education system. Sometimes जैसे हम ये कहें कि लड़की की आवाज भारी है, तो कई बार they feel that girls are being discriminated on this, or the boys जिनकी पतली है आवाज, तो उनको भी ये सारे abuses का सामना करना पड़ता है. Then the denial of the family and rights and recognition, when we talk about that. So these are some kind of crimes which they have been facing. Then moving ahead to the societal aspects, when we talk about the society, the society have been witnessing this since past decades, and LGBT people have gain more and more tolerance and acceptance in India, especially in the larger cities. So most of the LGBT people in India, they remain closeted and fearing discrimination from their families, who might see homosexuality as shameful. Discrimination is still present in the rural areas. They, if a girl wears, when we're talking about the situation in the rural areas, if a girl wears or present herself to the nature, to showing herself or wearing the clothes like a boy, she is being questioned by the community also, that why it is so, it is in the rural areas more. So where LGBT people often face rejection from their families, and they are being forced opposite sex marriages. And then people in the LGBT community are fighting for their equal rights and acceptance. People, especially, they face a lot of difficulty in finding the acceptance. Then next, people in the LGBT community are also looked down upon all the time because of the major issue, because discrimination against the LGBT community is highly prevalent in the society when we are talking about the LGBT community. Then people prejudices and lead them to think that LGBT people are odd, and they are very different from normal people. Their homosexuality and queer identities may be acceptable to more Indian youths than ever before, but within the boundaries of their families, homes, and schools. And we have also heard that the people who are coming out of the closet and declaring to their families that they are not the person their family expected them to be, being an LGB or T, it is not a problem, nor is it a choice as such, because they declare themselves that we are not belonging to the family, but we belong to so and so groups. So LGBT individuals are merely individuals who have sexual preferences that differ from what would appear to be the norm due to differing learned behaviors, and having a personal perspective and mindset that differs from everyone else's. Next, talking about there is one more thing which is involved in it. It is the homophobia, which can take many different forms, including the negative attitudes and beliefs about aversion to or prejudice against bisexual, lesbian, and gay people. So it is often based in irrational fear and misunderstanding. So some people's homophobia may be rooted in the conservative religious beliefs also. So this is the one of the aspect in the society which people belonging to the LGBT community have been facing. Then coming to the legal aspect of it, if we talk about the normal men and women who have the right to live in the society with respect, then why not a person who belongs to LGBT can also live in the society with respect? It's not about what our religion says, it's all about what humanity says. It is important that the humanity should be preserved and protected. So when we talk about the religion, as per the Hindu aspects, Lord Rama had given a boon to Hijras for their loyalty. That's why it is considered that the curse or the boon of Hijras means a lot to the normal beings. And we think that everyone who is living in this world, either normal or abnormal, has equal rights to live in the society with full respect. So everyone in the society one should be given respect in the society. That's the important motive. And then coming to the amendment part of the IPC, that is the article section 377 of the IPC. So the LGBT community and their legal rights have been an issue for a long period, especially in a country like India, where section 377 of the IPC had continued to operate until September 2018. And there has been a great uproar in favor of the community and the support for its members, especially in the past decades. So the voices against them have unfortunately been told just as loud. And in Navteej Singh versus Union of India, it was an important case in support of the community, but not much else has been done to move towards a place where the community is provided with adequate legal support. Then moving ahead to the scope of the community's legal rights in India. So the community members, they do not enjoy any special legal rights. So they are only permitted by law to engage in consensual sexual intercourse, as criminalizing it would be against their fundamental rights. So the scope of the rights thus is limited to any basic fundamental rights that are enjoyed by individuals in this country. So civil rights, on the other hand, are not they are not something that members of the community enjoy as yet, and they are not legally permitted to register their legally permitted to register their marriages, which means that their marriage is not yet recognized by the Indian laws. And there is a case given where a couple in Kerala, both of whom belong to the LGBT community, they got married and attempted to register their marriage under the Special Marriages Act 1954 in January 2020. But however, the district administration denied the permission to register the marriages, stating that the law did not permit them to marry. Although the Special Marriage Act 1954 does not explicitly deny permission to the registration of marriage of community members, and it also does not explicitly mention the permission to do so. So thus the scope of the civil rights of the community members has a long way to go in India. Then next, coming to the LGBT community, their issues have been given under the section 377 of the IPC, and it had continued to operate till 2018, and the section has now been decriminalized to an extent. And this is my question to the students over there, that does the LGBT community enjoy any civil rights? We can take this discussion later on. Then next, moving to the Supreme Court overturned the ruling of the Delhi High Court and decriminalized Section 377 wholly. And in Navtej Singh versus Union of India, a 5-judge bench gave a unanimous decision on September 2018, and which declared Section 377 as unconstitutional in the eyes of the law, and the fundamental rights under Articles 14, 15, 19, and 21 had all been violated by the existence of such a provision of law that criminalized consensual sexual intercourse between the adults. So, now moving ahead to another petition which was filed before the Supreme Court. It was in the form of a review petition and sought to ask the questions regarding the right to marriage, adoption, and other civil rights, and the inclusion in the Navtej Singh versus Union of India judgment. And the bench, however, said that they were not inclined to entertain the petition post the judgment of 2018. Then the petition for, again, the registration of marriage, as I've discussed already, it came in 2020, where a homosexual couple approached the Kerala High Court demanding the recognition of the same sex. And the plea further stated that the non-recognition of same-sex marriages violates the principles of equality, individual dignity, and personal autonomy. So the judge in the case has also notified that the state and central government and they have agreed to examine the plea of the couple, and this is a major step which came forward in the legal process for the members of the LGBT community at large. So although same-sex marriage is recognized in several countries across the globe, Indian community members only view it as a distant dream. So however, there is a chance that this dream may turn into a reality later or sooner sometimes. And then coming to the steps which can be taken forward for the protection is like they should be given adoption and marriage rights. They should be the sexual harassment at workplace should be stopped with them. Then the gender violence should not be there. The rights should be equally given, and the increasing awareness and greater acceptance should be given to them. And media should also play its role in projecting correct information to the community. Then education should be provided, such some we can say some policies or some kind of yojanas should be started for giving them good education, giving good education to the children who belong to such community, because the more they will be educated, the more they can come forward, right? And then now what in the last means it's the end up. So the constitutional rights or the legal rights, such as article which have been given under article 14, 15, they should be protected, because they might be belonging to a separate category, but the rights should be protected of the people who are belonging to LGBT community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Inderpreet ma'am, for this really enlightening session. Now we would be moving forward to the Q&A session. So I would invite Chaitali Wadhwa ma'am to please unmute herself and ask her questions.
Hi, thanks, Mansi. Good evening, everybody. My name is Chaitali. I'm actually a faculty at Manav Rachna teaching gender and law. But I'm also pursuing my PhD in gender studies, which is why there was a very specific question that I wanted to, ask all the speakers, particularly Kritika, if you could answer this. We keep talking about how there is a requirement to provide a certain space to members of the LGBTQ community to, come out in as the phrase goes. But is there a possibility to have certain legal protections to those individuals who do not want to identify themselves openly in this space? How do you think we should propose going about with giving them those protections?
Can I just clarify that I've understood you correctly? You're basing this on the demand for spaces, on the demand for safe spaces for queer persons to come out?
No, I'm saying that those individuals who have acknowledged their sexual orientation or their sexuality, but have not openly accepted it in the community at large, we still need to grant them protections, but our laws are more specific for those who have identified themselves. So how do we grant protections to those who are still in the closeted community?
I think yeah, go ahead, Anshina.
Sorry, I just want to say, I don't think there are any laws to protect anyone from the community, whether they're out or not. That's one. Secondly, the assumption, I think we never ask straight people whether they're straight. No, we don't expect them to be shouting about their sexuality. But yet there is an expectation by people at large that gay people should be out. So I think that's part of the education, that if we create an environment which is safe, people will then feel good about disclosing their sexuality if they want to. But right now, I think we need to be really clear that there are no laws protecting anyone from this community, whether they're out or not. The only thing that has happened to some extent is for the trans community. That's it. But for the rest of the community, there isn't anything at all. At least that's my understanding. I could be, yeah.
And just to add to what Ms. Anjali is saying, I completely agree. I was also kind of unclear by what you meant regarding protections for persons who have come out as LGBT, as queer. But beyond that, if we're talking about legal reform, as far as anti-discrimination legislation goes, we have none in this country. So if we're talking about legal reform to grant protections, what do you need to grant protection from? You need to grant protection from discrimination and what stems from that discrimination. Yeah. So that would be one way to look at potential legal reform in the future if we're talking about protection.
Could I just ask a follow-up question that was actually a part of what I wanted to confirm? So do you think it would be ideal to have an anti-discriminatory law or like a new legislation altogether, or would it be better to make modifications in the already existing statutes that we have?
So this has been addressed by several parties already. I encourage you to look at Tarunab Khaitan's draft of his equality law, as well as the Center for Law and Policy Research draft equality law as well. I think the major stand that has been taken by persons advocating for such legal reform, Anjali ma'am, please correct me if I'm wrong, is that we need a separate anti-discrimination legislation as well as separate infrastructure in terms of equality codes, a commission, etc. Yeah, to actually operationalize the legislation and to ensure that it is implemented.
Right.
So this is something that has been worked on in the past.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kritika ma'am, for answering the question. So we have a next question also. It's from Soumya Bajaj to Anjali ma'am, that on a personal level, the mental health status of the community members who have faced the abuse is negligent. In fact, a few conversion therapy advocates are psychological professionals. Can you please throw some light on this about facing and the reflection of the same on other basic aspects of life?
Can you just repeat that question? I don't think I got it completely.
Okay, ma'am. Soumya Bajaj, I request you that if you could please personally ask ma'am.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm sorry, actually, I was facing some network issues earlier. Ma'am, what I intended to ask was that about the physical abuses and the mental abuses you spoke about to the community and the advocates as well. So there is always the mental health aspect to that as well. So even when you spoke about the conversion therapy thing, I've actually read about it somewhere, and I have realized that a few psychology professionals also advocate the same. So when the protectors are the predators over here, so how to face this and how to manage through the situation.
There are bodies that have come out strongly against this. The medical council is very clear that conversion therapy should not happen. So people who are saying that this is fine are in violation of every ethical and legal code that you can think of. It is a no. Yet, unfortunately, we in our experience, most people who have been taken to advocates of conversion therapy have been parents of young people who happen to be gay. So it has so much to do with the attitudes of society. So there's absolutely, look, it is illegal to do this. They're not supposed to do it. In our fight with three of these doctors, two of them have lost their licenses. So it's not like this is something that they can do, but they get away with it. Just like all the Jadoo Tona guys who do what they do to take care of women who are seen as wayward, or to take care of people who don't fit into the mold. These guys fall in that category for me. So, and unfortunately, it is parents themselves, families themselves who are taking them to these kind of taking them into these kind of spaces. So it has so much to do with how do we change the attitudes? How do we fight this homophobia that exists? How do we make families understand that having a gay child is not the end of the road, right? And being gay is not about sex alone, because when you ask someone, they only think, oh, it's only a sexual thing. But it is about love, it is about commitment, it's about caring. How do we get people to start thinking like that? And therefore, it becomes very important that all of this becomes part of our curriculum, part of what we are taught. Respect, look, we are a society that is so stratified on class and caste lines. We inherently discriminate very easily against someone who we don't think are good enough people. So it's also, this whole thing is, how do we teach young people respect? Because it's a very learned behavior. How do we convince people about the importance of inclusion? So one is, we need stronger laws. We need laws to protect people who are being violated, period, from the community. Unfortunately, there are no laws that exist for their protection. The other is working on changing attitudes. And the Supreme Court is very clear about this. It's told the government of India that you need to do something about changing attitudes. And therefore, change in curriculums. You have to ensure these issues are included in curriculums which teach teachers, which teach doctors, which teach other professionals. So I think the path is clear in front of us. It's how do we put it into action, which is the problem right now.
And just adding few more words, ma'am. And actually, it is the delay which takes place in the decisions is also a factor responsible for all such things, I think. Means things might happen years ago and the decision will come after so many years. It takes so much of long time and duration gets past that it is very difficult for them also, I think.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you so much, ma'am, for answering. I will move to the next question. So Narayani Gupta has a question that she wants to ask. So basically, she wants to know what actually homophobia is. So she also asked that for how long we have to wait to see our Indian society, that a society accepts the community as a whole without any prejudices which they face today. Also expect so much of positive changes in Indian laws for them.
May I answer?
Yes,
It is
ma'am.
okay. It is the fear, it is the hatred, it is the discomfort towards the LGBT community which people show towards them. Means it is the discomfort which we show to them. That is called as the homophobia. If I am not wrong, Anjali ma'am.
Yes, absolutely. And therefore we violate. See, what I think it also stems from a very deep-seated anxiety about what we don't know. I remember over the years fighting for 377, and one of the most common things I would hear is, I remember there was this BJP Karyakarta who, in an open television debate, told me, if you accept homosexuality, then everyone will become homosexual. This is what homophobia is, right? And my answer to him was, listen, if maybe then homosexuality is the norm and heterosexuality isn't, right? This fear that you have, it's such an illogical fear, but it's coming from so deep within. Just see how deep-seated it is, that everyone will become gay. And then his other point was, then what will happen? Our species will stop existing. I said, yes, that's a big problem in this country right now, right? But it's incredible how deep-seated this fear is. I can't tell you. But homophobia is reflected in this fear of homosexuals. It is reflected in this hatred, as Inderpreet said, towards the community. It is reflected in the way we treat people from this community.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I hope Narayani has understood what homophobia is. And we have a question from Dipanshi Bhutani. She says, like, mostly people here are from college and environment of schools and colleges, and we are not gender neutral friendly environment in our universities or in our schools. So she says, I guess every student here will accept that, so that in so many ways that you will like to suggest us to make the atmosphere of a college gender friendly. What would be the ways that we can promote gender friendliness in our schools or universities?
Well, I would say is first of all, understand that there is a need for this. I think that's the first step you take. Secondly, is learn about it. For example, what comes to my mind is there are many trans people who don't want to be called, who want to be addressed as they or them, for example. And I remember when this first happened, my response, it's very difficult to talk to someone who looks male or female and you have to address them as they or them. I'm just giving an example. And I remember just sitting once like this and saying, oh my God, this is so difficult. And my niece was there. I said, how does one do this? And she said, well, that's the way it is. Get over it and learn to accept it and move on. And this was this young girl telling me this, right? So it's how does one teach oneself? I think that's the way I would do it. And look, unfortunately, nothing is gender neutral in our culture. So that is something we have to deal with. And if you look at even our laws, can you imagine our rape laws are not gender neutral? Forget about anything else. So we have a long way to go. But I think at our own level, we can start accepting and trying to make the environment around us gender neutral when we talk about these issues. I don't know which other way we can do it. So unless, one of the ways to do it is when institutions say that we will follow a gender neutral policy. Now, one of the things, just to give you an example, I'm on many committees for sexual harassment, right? Nowadays, you have to have these sexual harassment committees in most institutions. And I remember, and one of the things I do in all these places is push them to follow a more gender neutral understanding of the Vishaka judgment. So I say, okay, do what the court tells you to do, but you can always go beyond the law in a positive way. So if you say that in our organization, we also will include harassment by men of men or women harassing women, the organization can do it, right? So there are ways to do it. Of course, you won't have the same kind of strictures as you would have if a man is harassing a woman, but at least it is there and you've started that journey. So I think there are small things at our own level that we can start looking at to make the environment around us gender neutral.
Definitely. And if I can just add to that, a lot of it starts with learning, educating ourselves, and it also involves a lot of unlearning. It involves a lot of unlearning of what has been instilled in our minds from when we're children, how a person is supposed to look. Even things like, when you have your hair cut short. When I was younger, my hair was cut short, and everyone used to keep talking about, why do you have a boy cut? What is a boy cut? I mean, like even very casual ways in which we ascribe kind of sexes and genders to specific behaviors, appearance, the ways we speak, the ways we interact with each other, what we wear, how we conduct ourselves. People getting made fun in school and college for being boys getting made fun of in school and college for being effeminate. Small things like that, unlearning what we've grown up with in terms of how we categorize people is so important when we talk about gender neutrality. And when we talk about gender neutrality, it doesn't just mean, treating everybody the same. People's unique differences also have to be celebrated and acknowledged. So, I mean, again, I'm being very abstract here, but you can see how deep-rooted all of this is. You really have to kind of go back and confront your own internalized prejudices, because the most woke of us can be the most prejudiced as well. We just don't acknowledge it within ourselves. So that process of making our surroundings more inclusive and friendly to all means that we have to go back within ourselves and use that as a starting point to unlearn our prejudices and actually practice inclusivity. And it's a process. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's just something that we have to stay committed to.
I would like to say that after listening to you, respected speakers, I feel that it's high time that in India we respect individualism. We should respect how each and every individual wants to live his or her life. Be it a person who is straight or a lesbian or a gay. And when Kritika ma'am said that we have to unlearn everything, I was remembering my preschool notebooks wherein we were taught girl and boy. And after a period of time when I reached in 10th class or in 11th class, at that time I realized that, okay, it's not just girls and boys over there on this planet. There are other people on or are also on this planet, but they feel them, they are treated as aliens. They don't come out very frequently because the society is really cruel to them, because only a straight girl and a straight boy is recognized as a person in our society, on our planet. But yes, it's high time that we should change our preschool notebooks also. When there is right of education, then yes, this curriculum should also change. So if are there any more questions or any more comments? Okay, so Bhagesh Gupta has a question for Kritika ma'am. How are sexual orientation and gender identity determined?
They're always self-determined. Nobody has the right to tell anybody else what they think the other person's sexual orientation is. Or every sexual orientation, gender identity, even the Supreme Court has said you have the right to self-identify your gender. These are all self-determined and they are not to be questioned beyond a point.
And just to add to that, it's not a matter of choice.
Yeah.
You know, no one chooses to be a certain way. Can you imagine in this world which gives gay people such a hard time, a person saying, oh, I choose to be gay? Why would they do that? And, you know, one of the things I hear a lot about is these days it's very fashionable to be gay. What on God's earth does that mean? You know, it's not. People, why would anyone, considering the whole world gives them such a hard time, why would they choose to do that? So for people who are gay, and you know, I would just actually to kind of make you understand that a bit more, there's this very simple exercise that I can take a minute to do with you. Just close your eyes and think of the first time you were attracted to someone. All right, open your eyes. And at that time, when you felt the way you did, usually between the age of, say, 8 to 12, did you make a choice to be attracted, saying that, okay, I'm straight and therefore I must be attracted to the opposite sex? For those of us who are straight on this platform, was that we told ourselves, oh, I'm feeling like this, but I'm only going to be attracted to someone from the opposite sex? No, it happened really naturally. So and it's the same with gay people. At that same age, at that same stage that straight people were feeling attracted to the opposite sex, gay people were feeling attracted to the same sex. But they already knew the environment was so bad that they couldn't talk about it. So very often gay folks will tell you that everyone was talking about being attracted to someone from the opposite sex. How could I say I'm attracted to someone from the same sex? They already knew it was wrong, even though no one had told them it was wrong. So I don't think it's a matter of choice. I think it is something that is so natural for people to be the way they are.
So thank you so much, ma'am.
Can I quickly ask a small question here?
Yes, ma'am.
So, like Mansi had talked about the notebooks and Anjali ma'am was talking about, the ages of 8 to 12. Is there any right stage or any right point in your life where we should start talking to youngsters about these concepts? What age does this start? Where does the awareness start?
Earlier the better is my response. whether it has to do with issues of sexuality, and especially when a young kid asks you something, try and answer age-appropriate information. For example, when we look at in our country, in our culture, where sexual abuse is such a big issue, it's not something we talk about, right? And the abuse usually happens in the home. And therefore, we have to start talking about a right touch and a wrong touch with a child when he or she is really tiny, really young. They have to know that if someone does something inappropriate, they can come to you as the adult and tell you. And it's the same with young people who ask, with young children who ask about homosexuality or about sex, that we give them an answer which will make sense to them. I mean, you can't tell a 4-year-old about how to use a condom in the same way, or what a condom is, in the same way that you would tell a 15-year-old, right? So it has to be age-appropriate information that is shared with whoever asks those questions. And even if they don't ask those questions, you must create an environment where they can talk about these issues.
Right. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Are there any more questions? You can put them in the chat box, or you can ask respected speakers directly.
I just want to say that if you think of any questions later on, I've shared my email address with Mansi, so please feel free to write to me directly.
Sure, ma'am, I will convey those questions. Anjali, ma'am, there is one request from my side. Could you please share, like, you have a journey so long, and you had a struggle, a legal battle for 8 years long. So are there any more instances wherein you felt that, oh my God, this is so unreasonable and this should stop like immediately? And ma'am, how did you maintain the calm? Because that's really something which I wanted to ask, because if anybody who's talking to me something which is really unreasonable, I just get short tempered and I just feel like, are you mad or what? Don't you have basic reasonability or not? So how did you maintain that calm? And
I think I must have been a lot like you. The moment someone said something I didn't agree with, I would like go up in smoke till I realized that was not getting me anywhere. So that was one behavior I had to unlearn very quickly. And I found that the more I came across as someone who would listen to what they had to say, it was easier to deal with them. So I think it's just something that you have to teach yourself, and part of it may also be it happens with age, right? That very well could be, because I remember when I was your age, maybe, I didn't have the patience. I would get really pissed off and angry and shoot my mouth off, which I just don't do. And people are amazed because I will sit and listen to someone who says diametrically opposite to everything I'm saying. And now I sit quietly and listen and then say, okay, can we also look at it from another lens? So it's very difficult for them to say no. So also it's using every opportunity to bring about change. And the other thing is to teach yourself how to be respectful. That's a very learned behavior, by the way. So we have to respect different attitudes, just as or beliefs. Just as someone, just as you believe in something very deeply, someone else does too, right? So it's very easy for us to shut people out if we don't listen to them. And I'll give you an example that is that creates a lot of furor, like a vegetarian or a vegan person and a meat-eating person, right? So if you really want to change someone's way of thinking, by telling them, oh, you are a flesh eater, is not going to help, right? So it's how do we change ourselves becomes critical. Only then can we look at changing others, if that's what we want to do. I don't believe I need to change anybody. I believe that I just need to show them that there is another way of thinking and then leave it to them to decide. And those changes happen over a period of time. Believe me, they happen because I've seen it happen. So there's a lot of hope. Don't give up hope and just learn to become calm. I can't think of anything else, which is a very learned behavior. Hey.
Yes, ma'am, surely with more experience and the way you have taught me and the way you have calmly and composedly explained me everything, I will learn. And ma'am, is there any instance which you would like to share if you are comfortable?
Any instance? Sorry, these dogs are barking away, but what did you say?
Ma'am, any instance which you would like to share, like it was an 8-year-long battle, any law professional which came across you who was not unreasonable with the approach?
Yeah. Well, I think there have been a number of instances right throughout which one has had to deal with, right? Whether it is the kind of violent responses that one got, whether it is being told that women like me single-handedly are responsible for the degradation of the moral values in this country, or it's me being told by the likes of Baba Ramdev, कि आप भी ये भी ऐसी है क्या? So yeah, so it's just not one single thing; it's the whole caboodle of things that happen. But let me tell you, the violence, the threats, all of that happen. But I don't think if you truly believe in something, I don't think that will ever hold you back. Because if you really believe that change is critical, if you really believe that all of us in this country must have equal rights, we must have live in a just and equitable society. And I'm not just talking about the LGBT community here. I'm talking of the range, the Dalits, the Muslims, everyone you can think of. All of us in this country have an equal right to be allowed to exist in this country. So I think it's these many things that have kept me going. Yeah. I just feel we are living in such a different environment today than even 10 years ago that it's frightening. And therefore, how do all of you, for example, I'm on my way out at some point, but how do all of you young people ensure that you work towards creating that just society? Because only you guys can do it. No one else is going to come from outside to do it for us. So we absolutely have to remember that and work towards it.
Thank you, ma'am. And we really promise you we will work reasonably and we will respect each and every person. We have learned that from you, Kritika ma'am, and Inderpreet ma'am also today in this session. We will surely abide by knowledge and the sharings which you have shared. Kritika ma'am, I have one, not a question, but yes, it's a kind of a question that we have legislations and our law commission, they are also very active. But like we have now the Citizenship Act, an amendment, we have these farmer bills over there. So then why isn't the commission or why isn't the legislature recognizing the immediate importance to legislate laws for the community so that they have a recognition?
Because it's so political.
I can see Anjali ma'am just shaking her head.
One of the things that I'm trying to be calm.
Yeah, it's a great question. And look at what are the motivations for these extremely proactive steps by our legislature? Tell me, in terms of the Farmers Bill as well as the CAA. They're all incredibly politically motivated, serving a larger agenda. Serving a larger, very obvious agenda, which I don't want to really, expound upon here. But so the latest law in respect of the trans and intersex communities, I don't know if you've read it. It's the Transgender Protection of Rights Bill Now Act. I suggest that you do go through it too, and something that will just come out at you when you read that legislation is the way our MPs, the way our politicians still pathologize trans identity, still pathologize non-heterosexual, non-cisgender identities in this country. There's still that basic lack of understanding, that basic disgust, revulsion, that basic kind of suspicion, cynicism, prejudice that reflects in these laws, that seek to control these gender identities, that seek to categorize trans persons as the third sex, when in reality they are so much more. The acknowledgement of a gender spectrum, the acknowledgement of the fact that there are more than two sexes even, is still way in the future for us as a society, let alone our politicians who seem to be from, the aging old men who are completely out of touch with who we actually are as a modern 21st century society here, which, I'm kind of stammering because it's like, there's just still so much that we need to reflect upon in terms of our understanding of gender identity and sex, that to expect our legislature to actually be able to concretize and prioritize these issues is, I don't think it's reasonable at this time. It'll take a lot of reform, it'll take a lot of activism, it'll take concerted movements to actually, and even then, who knows, the transgender bill was in deliberation from 2016 onwards. Various drafts were put out. There was actually an MP from Tamil Nadu, Mr. Tirchi Siva, who put out a bill that was actually endorsed by the trans community in Tamil Nadu. That bill was completely scrapped, even though it was the only draft bill that actually had some sort of legitimacy and acceptance by the community themselves, replaced with another archaic legislation that calls for certificates of identity to be issued to trans persons. Trans persons have to go get an examination done before district authorities and then get a certificate of identity to certify that they are transgender so that they can receive state benefits. If that's not pathologizing, if that's not anti-NALSA that says you have the right to self-identify your gender, I don't know what is. The gaps between what the Supreme Court has said, how society thinks, political motivations behind passing these laws, and the actual mentality of our politicians is still something that is, it's infuriating to say that.
It's beyond belief. It's beyond belief. You're talking about gender and you're talking about these issues, something even more basic than this. I remember there was a parliamentary committee headed by Venkaiah Naidu, where we had to go and talk to them about introduction of sex education into the school curriculum. You won't believe it. I was aghast. I thought I'd heard wrong. He said, oh, we can never have this because all our children will start having sex all the time. And I'm sitting there and saying, didn't you listen to even a word what any of us were saying? But that is the attitude, that is the thinking. And therefore, how do we get these men to start thinking differently? I don't see a lot of hope there, apart from just ensuring that a younger, more progressive lot comes in, which again is not very hopeful, because look at the younger progressive lots that are coming in. So I think right now we are between the devil and the deep sea. So therefore, if we can, just to give you some hope, I think all of us at our own level can do something. And so it becomes critical to start doing that, and then also look at fighting for laws to back us up.
I really feel that are we living in a democratic nation? Because as for democracy, which I have learned in school, it says that every citizen is the ruler, and the lesbian, gay, and people belonging to this community, they are also the part of the citizenship. So so we should call this a vote bank government. We should not call this a democratic government, because it's not democracy actually. And we are free from the colonial rule, but we are still stuck in the patriarchy world and the orthodox and the stereotypical world. So we should only celebrate Independence Day because we got independence on that day from the colonial rule.
I would
Yes,
just
but
like to.
patriarchy is well and alive, and I think nothing challenges patriarchy more than lesbianism, of course, but definitely than homosexuality. So really, that's why we're not seeing any kind of shift happening. Inderpreet wanted to say something.
Yes, ma'am. Actually, I just want to share one small incident which happened. I particularly belong to Madhya Pradesh, MP, and there in Bhopal, it is the hub of transgenders. Actually, means there are 3 to 4 communities, transgenders areas, local areas, and the moment this happens, anything, birth of a child or marriage, whatever happens, they reach there. They come to know about that without any information being given to them, but they reach there. But there are people who are normal people, but they have started behaving as transgenders just for the sake of getting money. So this is also a big problem in the society, because it is very difficult for them to prove themselves that for them it is okay, that they are able to tell that we are belonging to so and so community. But the normal people, just for the sake of money or the employment, what they do is they will show themselves that hum is community ke hain, this is also being taken forward in the society at many places. So this means what they will come in the trains and they'll behave like them, but they are normal guys who just want money from the people. They will be acting like them. So
can I just very quickly respond to this? I think what's happened over the years is, it used to be that people from the Kinnar community would get castrated. 99% are born male, and they would get castrated because it is a cultural tradition, and that's how it is. But over the years, a lot of people from the Kothi community, it's not like they are so-called normal men, or I don't like using the word normal, but I would say it's not like that they are men. But what has happened over the years is that a lot of people from the Kothi community, which is the more effeminate men who are married to women, but also have male partners, have joined the Hijra community. And it's not uncommon now in the Hijra community to have non-castrated Hijras who are called, you have castrated Hijras who are called Nirvan Hijras, and you have the non-castrated Hijras. So you will find that they will grow their breasts, take hormones to remove the hair, but will keep their genitals. And it's not like they're not Hijras or they don't identify with it. Because the concept of Hijra is very specific to South Asia, and it's a way of living. There is a gharana, there is a guru, you live in that kind of environment. It's a way of life. So I think what happens, like the police constantly tell me, madam, ye to वैसे pretend कर रहा है, ये तो हिजरा नहीं है. But the point is that man identifies as Hijra. And he, as far as I'm concerned, he's a Hijra. But it's just that he's not castrated. So the cops will think that he's pretending because he's not castrated. Right? So I think that's where a lot of this confusion is coming. Because if you think about it, if you are not trans, and I tell you, you have to dress a certain way every day and come. Suppose as a man, I am told that, okay, you have to wear a sari every day. Would you, as a straight man, would straight men be able to do it? No. So it's not like that they're pretending to be Hijras, but I think our knowledge and understanding of this whole range of people who are part of this community is very limited. So therefore, this remains.
Right.
Just to add to that, also as Anjali ma'am said, and this happens all over. I also used to live in Kolkata for 3 years and working with trans people amongst others, and I used to hear this all the time. Oh, if you go to the lake in South Calcutta, there'll be a lot of men pretending to be hijras. They'll stuff their blouses. They'll come like very graphic descriptions of these people who pretended to be trans to just take your money. But then I had to take one step back and be like, okay, what is your issue? Is your issue with the fact that there are people coming to you in a public place asking for money? Is your issue the fact that trans ways of making money for this particular community are being co-opted by cis men? If your issue is the second, is the latter one, which is that you feel like these persons are kind of co-opting a trans identity to make money for themselves, think about how it came to be that way, because it's not easy money. It's not like, just because they are considered auspicious and they are invited to your houses during weddings and births of children, etc. It doesn't mean they're revered like deities. It doesn't mean that they're treated very well. It doesn't mean that they have all the opportunities that we do as presumably cisgender people, and they choose to make money this way. I think we need to also go back and kind of see what our real issue is with this supposed misuse of the trans identity and people pretending to be trans. So again, that as Anjali ma'am said, you have to think about what we understand as trans, what we understand as the spectrum of trans identities in themselves. And then we have to go back and we have to think about what circumstances led to this situation, so that we can try and identify what internalized prejudices we may have in looking at these situations as well.
Thank you so much, respected speakers, for this really enlightening session. Thank you so much. We learned a lot from you. So with this, we have come to an end of this session. And
Just before that, Mansi, I think Narayani Gupta asked one question that we missed, which is why in the first place was homosexuality criminalized? So I read a study recently. This is all I'm going to say. Anjali ma'am and Inderpreet ma'am want to take this up, please go ahead. But I just read a study recently on different colonial laws that were imposed by the British as well as other European colonies, and it was overwhelmingly found in the study that British colonies had a legacy of these laws that criminalized carnal intercourse against the order of nature. So basically non-heterosexual, recreational, non-reproductive sex.
So it has its roots in a very Judeo-Christian tradition. Because look at the language. If you have carnal intercourse against the order of nature, it is definitely stems from that. And it's also about control. How do you exert control? It's all about that. Because if you look at a lot of other cultures, sexuality is very fluid. But if you look at our own culture, if you look at the fact that temples had the kind of carvings that you see in Khajuraho, these were used as teaching areas, right? And the range of activities that are depicted in those temples, right from sex with animals to group sex to lesbian sex to homosexual, everything you can think of and some that you haven't. So it's all there. So I think it has to do a lot with the way religion interpreted all of this and the way they could control you, because if they can control your sexuality, they can control you.
Inderpreet ma'am, would you like to say something in the
No,
end?
thank you. Thank you.
I just copy pasted a link to that study in the chat box in case Narayani or anyone.
Thank you so much, ma'am, Thank you so much. So with this, I really don't want this session to end because the conversation is going really enlightening, and it is so good to hear from you respected speakers. But eventually, because we have a time duration, so we have come to an end to this session. Thank you so much, respected speakers and respected audience, for joining us. We couldn't ask for a great session much more. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And nice meeting
Thank you,
everybody.
Anjali ma'am and Kritika ma'am. It was very nice interacting with all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye. Hey, 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 hey.